Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
It was a calm, composed win from Real Madrid, a win that oozed of a team that's used to doing it on the big stage as they eased past Liverpool 1-0. Madrid had the better chances, with the XG ending 2 to 0.5. But how were Ancelotti's tactics in possession able to be so dominant? Let's take a look. And right from the Real Madrid goal kick, things were interesting, as Rudiger and Militao would split either side of Courtois, whilst Camavinga and often Kroos, although Modric could do the same, would offer a double pivot to Courtois. Liverpool were extremely aggressive in the press, with Salah and Nunez coming in off the flanks looking to press the centre-backs, and this was backed up by Jota as well as Gakpo, who would move on to the double pivot of Camavinga and Toni Kroos. The fullbacks were initially left free, and if the ball went wide directly, a fullback of Liverpool's would have to come across and cover, with the rest of the back four shifting across. However, if the ball went through the centre-backs first, the Liverpool midfield would have had more time to shift across, meaning by the time it got to the fullback, a midfielder would be able to close them down, allowing their own fullback to remain deeper and a bit more structural integrity to be maintained in the back line. Nunez and Salah were on the centre-backs, whilst Jota is tying up Camavinga. Gakpo is in a position where he could move on to Toni Kroos. Because the ball goes to the centre-back first, Milner then has the time to move across and press the fullback. But if at times a winger was staying wider, meaning that one of Jota or Gakpo had to press, the shape could look like this, with a man looking to tie up Modric. And Real Madrid were looking to find solutions to this pressing shape from Liverpool from the off. And what we often saw was that Benzema, rather than remain high up the pitch, would drop in alongside Modric so that there was a 2 versus 1 against Fabinho. And this sort of structure was common not just from goal kicks, but when Real generally had the ball in deeper regions. So, in this scenario, what it could mean is that Courtois could play over the press to one of the men free in the midfield regions. So here we see that Jota is wider on the fullback instead, and we still have our front two of Nunez and Salah on the centre-backs, meaning that it's Milner who now moves on to Modric, and Gakpo in the midfield potentially has 2 men to deal with, leaving Fabinho somewhat isolated. So we see that Benzema dropping in from centre forward is able to be the extra option in the midfield. What we began to see at times is that when Benzema did look to drop deeper in these build-up phases, Van Dijk would push up from centre-back in order to prevent Fabinho being outnumbered. This would force Liverpool to switch to a much flatter back three, and Vinicius, especially in the second half, whenever Van Dijk was dragged forward, would look to make runs in behind that Courtois could look to find, or any of the other men on the ball. But even in open play situations, we saw that Liverpool's midfield could struggle against Real Madrid's. As we know, Real Madrid's midfield is high quality and doesn't really maintain fixed positions, instead drifting around to find the space. But roughly what we saw in this match was Modric higher off the right hand side, and in possession, Kroos would be deeper, with Camavinga offering support. And the Liverpool midfield was looking to be hyper aggressive in the press, going man to man as much as they could. However, their defensive solidity was not really helped by the fact that Gakpo can play in midfield, but he has strong attacking instincts, meaning that he could at times be caught ball watching. This, combined with the fact that Vinicius' pace meant that the rest of the Liverpool backline were often forced deeper, meant that there were often massive gaps between the lines for Real Madrid to exploit. If Gakpo was not highly aware, Kroos could simply move into the midfield off of him. This is a slightly different scenario, but we see the Liverpool midfield 3, and Vinicius' pace means that the backline is extremely deep, so there's a massive gap, and it is Nacho from left back who has simply wandered into this position. So then he easily receives, and the entire midfield is taken out of the game, which allows Vinicius to run in behind. Gakpo is drawn into the press, and we can see that Kroos has identified that there is a massive gap between the lines into which he can move. Once again, he receives behind the Liverpool back line. But if it wasn't a midfielder moving into the space, we could also see Valverde off the right wander into these regions, or more likely Benzema dropping into the space. So again, the midfield line for Liverpool has been staggered, and we see that both Valverde in off the right hand side as well as Benzema are patrolling to see if there is the potential to receive between the lines. High up the pitch, the flanks were the key for Real Madrid. On the left-hand side, it was Vinicius' role to give the width, but on the right, that was mainly assigned to Carvajal, who would push high up the pitch early on, and this gave Valverde options. We at times saw him move almost into a centre-forward position, and this would help to pin the centre-backs deeper, which could allow Benzema to more freely find space between the lines and off to the left-hand side. But Valverde could also be more in the half space, drawing in Robertson, and because Núñez is naturally a forward, at times he could either be caught high up the pitch, or even if he was deep, his positioning wasn't always the best, so space was then created for Carvajal to look to attack. Valverde is initially wide as well as Carvajal, and it looks like both men are covered. But now Valverde has tied up Robertson, and Núñez's attention is on the ball, meaning that Carvajal is suddenly the free man out wide. And he can receive, and Robertson moves wide to him, meaning Valverde is now free. But where Carvajal and Valverde were rarely in the same vertical line, on the left-hand side, it was different, as Nacho and Vinicius both tended to stay wide. And Real Madrid could cause danger in different ways down the left-hand side. Firstly, in the midfield, as discussed, Gakpo can play deeper, but always has an eye going forward, especially with the scoreline taken into account. So that meant he could often be caught slightly higher, at times pressing either Camavinga or Kroos, depending on who was on Real's left. This would leave a bit of a gap in this region, and as we know, Benzema loves to drop into the hole to help Vinicius to overload the left-hand side. So he could receive, drawing Trent in, or the centre-back, either way, creating opportunities for Vinicius to receive the ball. But perhaps what was most surprising is that Real Madrid did not have to work particularly hard to get into 1-versus-1 situations. Often, we would see Nacho receive the ball wide and Salah would press, but the vertical pass to Vinicius was fairly easy to find, and Trent was not touch tight to him, perhaps afraid of getting turned. But with time and space on the ball, Vinicius was the most dangerous player on the pitch. Here we see that Salah presses Nacho, but the pass to Vinicius is fairly straightforward, and he's able to face up Trent and gets past him. Again, Nacho can receive, he easily finds Vinicius, and Vinicius can then return the pass into him without much trouble, and again, Gakpo was mainly concerned with Kroos on the left-hand side of midfield. So this left-hand side situation was bad news for Liverpool, as Vinicius is elite in 1-versus-1 situations, and Trent, well, struggles at times. By the end of the game, Vinicius had completed the most dribbles on the pitch, the most key passes, whilst Trent, on the other hand, had been dribbled past the most times and had the worst tackle success percentage with just 14. And a lot of the passes that led to shots came down that left-hand side for Real Madrid. Even for the only goal of the game, we saw that Vinicius took advantage of Trent's sloppy positioning. Overall, Real Madrid glided through this encounter without many problems and will now be considered one of the favourites, and I'm curious to see how far you think they'll go. Liverpool, on the other hand, now turned their attention to the league to try and make sure they'll be back in the Champions League next year. For the manager tactical scores, Ancelotti's plan worked perfectly, never having to be near their best and still controlling proceedings, meaning that he earns a strong 7, whilst Klopp struggled to get his side creating chances when they desperately needed to, meaning he only earns a 4. But what are your thoughts? Drop them down below.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you might enjoy the content available on my Patreon. Not only does Patreon help to support the continued production of content, as I am a one-man team, but it also gives you early access to videos that will come on the channel. You'll also get exclusive videos, get to vote on polls, and so much more. And it's cheaper than ever, no longer having a tier system, so everyone on the Patreon gets access to all the content. So head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple to check it out.
But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.